I woke up after my heart had stopped for 11 seconds, and on my bedside table there was a note. "Rest up, Mom. We're off to Hawaii for 12 days. Call if it's an emergency." Not a single word of concern. Not a single family member by my side. Only the beeping of the heart monitor reminding me that I was still alive, though it seemed no one else cared. Before I continue, if you're listening to this story, please pause for just a second. Hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss more true stories like this one. And if you've ever learned a major life lesson, something you wish you'd known sooner, please share it in the comments below. You never know, someone might really need to hear it today. Thank you. I always thought that if I were to one day leave this world, at least someone would be holding my hand. My daughter, perhaps. Or an old acquaintance, or even just someone who knew my name and said it with kindness. But on that fateful day, the only things I heard were the shriek of machinery and a strange man's voice shouting, "Nora, stay with us. Don't go. Come on." Then there was a blinding white light, cold and empty. And then I woke up. My eyes stung and my head felt like it was being crushed by a heavy stone. The air smelled of antiseptic and a morgue-like dampness. I couldn't remember where I was or why I was lying here. Someone leaned over me, a young face with warm brown skin and kind eyes. "Hello, Mrs. Matthews. Glad to see you're awake. Everything is all right. I'm Marcus, your nurse." I didn't answer right away. My lips were too dry to form words. I glanced around the room, dim lighting, flickering screens, a tangle of wires plugged into my arms and chest. I moved my lips, trying to whisper, "Lauren, where's my daughter?" No one answered. Marcus just placed a hand on my shoulder, as gentle as if he were comforting a child. "You need to rest. Your daughter knows you're awake." I didn't understand. If she knew, why wasn't she here? That night I couldn't sleep. Not from the pain, but from the cold. A chill that crept from my spine all the way to my brain. I lay in silence, listening to every footstep in the hallway. At one point, I heard Marcus on the phone in the corner of the room, his voice low but still loud enough for me to catch a few words. "She's awake. Yes. No, it's fine. I just thought you might want to know." "Ah, yes. I understand." I didn't know who he was calling, but a feeling in my gut told me it was about Lauren. It was that mother's intuition, that sharp needle prick sensation you get when something isn't right with your child. The next morning, sunlight from the ICU window shone directly into my eyes. Marcus brought me a tray of liquid food, cold oatmeal, and apple juice, and placed a small piece of paper next to my hand. A note folded in 4, written in a familiar hand. "My daughters. Rest up, Mom. We're off to Hawaii for 12 days. Call if it's an emergency." I stared at it for a long time, so long that the oatmeal grew cold and the juice thinned out like tap water. I reread those 3 lines a dozen times as if I could excavate some hidden meaning. But no, there were only those words. No words of love. No trace of concern. Not a single apology for not being here when I almost died. I lay still, my hand clutching the note. Outside the window, a sparrow landed on the iron ledge, then flew away. I thought of the last time Lauren and I were together, my birthday 3 months ago. She had put her arm around my shoulder and smiled brightly. "I couldn't live without you, Mom." I had believed her. Now I was lying here alone with 3 lines as neat and impersonal as a dry cleaning receipt. And my heart, which had just been shocked back into rhythm less than a day ago, once again felt constricted. I turned my face away, staring at the stark white ceiling. I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't dead, but a part of me had just been extinguished. The medical transport vehicle left the hospital as a light drizzle began to fall. It wasn't a heavy rain, but a persistent one, as if the sky had nothing better to do than weep along with me. I sat huddled in the van, the thin hospital blanket across my lap, already damp on one side, because the door wasn't properly sealed. No one came to pick me up. No one called to ask if I had a ride home. When the van stopped in front of the house, the driver placed a plastic bag with a few of my belongings on the sidewalk and wished me a good day. I thanked him mechanically, then stood before my own front door. No, the house that used to be mine. I bent down to the ceramic frog on the porch, the emergency key holder. The whole family knew about, but it was empty. The porcelain was cold beneath my fingertips. They had taken the key. I sat down on the wooden porch bench, soaked by the rain, and waited. There was nothing else to do. I didn't know who I was waiting for. Lauren. Her husband, Rick. Anyone who still remembered I existed. 20 minutes later, the door finally opened. Rick peeked his head out, a steaming Starbucks cup in his hand. The smell of coffee mingled with fresh paint. "Mom," he said, hesitating, "you're home sooner than we expected." I said nothing. I just looked at him, then passed him into the house. He avoided my gaze, stepping aside to let me in. "Come on in. It's raining." Inside, the air was suffocatingly unfamiliar. The sofa I'd chosen 10 years ago was gone, replaced by a set of modern light gray chairs. The wedding photo of me and John was no longer on the wall. The frames with pictures of Lauren and her brother Aaron as children, photos I had cherished, had been taken down and piled into a cardboard box near the back door, labeled discard. The living room walls were half-painted. The smell of paint fought with the odor of fast food and dampness. A whiteboard hung crookedly in the kitchen, a list scribbled on it. Repaint bedroom. Take her to see a specialist. Close on the house sale by Wednesday. I stood frozen, unable to move. Rick muttered, "Let me call Lauren," and disappeared down the hall. I walked into the kitchen, my hand trembling as I steadied myself on a chair. On the dining table, amidst a pile of files and papers, was a thick, neatly clipped document, a durable power of attorney, with my signature dated 2 years ago, right around the time I had my hip replacement surgery. I remembered being groggy from the anesthesia as Lauren pushed a stack of papers into my hands. "It's just insurance forms, Mom. Sign them quickly so we can get the paperwork done." I signed, without asking, without reading, because I trusted her that they were just insurance forms. Now those insurance forms were the reason they were clearing out my home like an old garage sale. I pulled out a chair and sat down, trying to breathe evenly. My hand reflexively reached for the old iPad still plugged in near the sink. Aaron had used it for online school a few years ago and left it behind. Lauren must have forgotten to log out of her iMessage account. I opened it, typed in the password, still Laur 3N999D. The messages appeared instantly. The latest was from her husband to Lauren. "If the house isn't sold and she's still in a coma, we should go ahead and arrange the nursing home. We'll be able to breathe easier after the sale." She never knew how to respect boundaries. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even feel sad anymore. It felt like sitting before the ocean at low tide, empty and cold. Those words on the screen were clearer than any explanation. I put the iPad down. My hand reached into a kitchen drawer. There, I had always hidden a brown leather notebook where I'd kept every password since 1997, from bank accounts and insurance policies to the Amazon Prime account. Every time someone asked Mom, "Can you manage this for me?" I wrote it down. I flipped through the notebook, looking at the ink-smudged entries from over the years. And I knew. I knew with absolute clarity, without anyone having to say it to my face. I was no longer a mother to anyone in this house, and if they were planning to ship me off to some place that resembled a box, clean, convenient, and soulless, they had forgotten one thing: I'm not the type to sit back and let others arrange my life. I closed the notebook and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. Then I sat there in my own suddenly strange home, listening to the rain fall on the porch roof like drops of awakening. I didn't know where I would go or where I would start. But for the first time in years, I felt something inside me stirring back to life. I woke up at 4 a.m., not because I couldn't sleep, but because I needed to think. To think clearly. 2 days after returning from the hospital, I understood my place in this house. I was not a mother, nor was I the homeowner. I was just a problem, like a leaky faucet they wanted to fix quickly. Rick and Lauren worked all day and came home late. Aaron, my grandson, would shut himself in his room, offering only a perfunctory hello. I barely spoke to anyone except for the automated voice announcing Amazon deliveries at the door. Everything in the house proceeded as if I didn't exist. But I was beginning to exist again in a different way. I called Benjamin Clark at 10:32 on a Tuesday morning. Benjamin had been a law student of mine back when I taught at the community college. He was one of the few people who had ever listened to me with genuine attention. I wasn't sure how well he remembered me, but when I said, "Benjamin, this is Nora Matthews. I need your help." He was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "Mrs. Matthews. My God, I'd heard rumors, but you're alive. You're still here." Those rumors sent a chill down my spine. I told him everything briefly but clearly. I told him about the power of attorney, the house, and what I had read on the iPad. Benjamin listened in silence, never interrupting. Finally, he said, "You're not the first person this has happened to. But you can be the last if we do this right. I'll help you." Benjamin explained that the type of power of attorney I had signed was likely a healthcare directive, not one for real estate transactions. Unless I had signed a separate document, which I couldn't recall doing, the house was still partially mine. "I'll file a petition with the court," Benjamin said, "to halt all transactions related to the property pending verification of the document's validity." I put the phone down, feeling a little lighter, not because I was sure I would win, but because for the first time I wasn't alone anymore. That afternoon I walked around my bedroom, or rather the room they had let me sleep in temporarily. The closet had been partially cleared out. The furniture was arranged like a short-term rental. As I bent down to pick up a loose power outlet cover behind the dresser, I noticed something unusual. A screw wasn't tight. A tiny gap. Curious, I pulled gently and the entire outlet plate came off. Inside there were no wires but a tiny glittering black eye. A camera. I set it down as gently as if I were holding my own heart. I trembled. Not from fear, but from pain. They weren't just planning to send me away. They wanted to monitor my every breath. I said nothing. I didn't scream. I put the outlet cover back in place, pretending I hadn't seen a thing. I knew one thing. If they knew that I knew, they would change how they watched me. I needed time. In the following days, I observed more closely. Rick usually left the house at 8:10 a.m., always carrying his briefcase and making calls from his car. Lauren typically came home late, around 6 p.m. I suspected there were other cameras in the hallway, on the porch, maybe even in the kitchen. But I only needed a small window of time, a single opening. I planned my next move like the critical thinking instructor I once was. Friday night it was pouring rain. I used the excuse of going downstairs for my medication, already dressed in layers underneath my robe. An old reflective vest I used to wear for storm cleanup, a baseball cap, a medical mask. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and tucked the password notebook into an inner pocket. The small suitcase was already packed from the day before, hidden under the bed. I only took the essentials, some cash, the notebook, old documents, a few small keepsakes. I didn't need much, I just needed to leave. I left my room at 8:05 a.m. The camera in my room was surely watching, but I pretended to go to the bathroom, then quietly pulled a piece of black electrical tape from my pocket. I slapped it diagonally across the lens quickly and slipped out the back door. No one saw. No alarms, no shouts, only the clatter of the suitcase wheels on the wet cement. I pulled it across the patio past the lawn I used to mow every week when John was alive. I looked back at the house one last time. No lights turned on. I walked straight to the street and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't coming back. And that was the first time in years I felt free, not because someone allowed it, but because I had taken it back myself. I didn't choose Meadow Ridge for any profound reason. I was driving through eastern Vermont. A light rain was falling. The radio was full of static, and I was hungry. Then I saw a weathered wooden sign by the side of the road. Meadow Ridge Public Library, voted friendliest library in Vermont. I laughed. I had lost everything, and the thing that made me turn the wheel was a promise of kindness from a library no one had ever heard of. But sometimes a small reason is all you need. I stopped at a roadside diner and ordered a bacon and egg sandwich and a black coffee. The waitress, lily thin with eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in years, gave me a genuine smile. When I asked if there was anywhere to rent short-term without a contract, she pointed out back old Jim's trailer behind the auto shop. It ain't fancy, but it's private, and he don't ask questions. So I went. The small trailer was parked behind a lot slick with motor oil. The smell of gasoline hung in the air, and the silver paint on the exterior was peeling in patches. But inside, there was a bed, an electric stove, a clean bathroom, and most importantly, nobody knew who I was. I paid for a month in cash, didn't give my real name, and introduced myself as Helen Whitaker, a widow who used to be a librarian in Roanoke, Virginia, with no children. My husband passed from cancer 8 years ago, I told Jim when he asked idly. I'm just looking for a quiet place to live out my days. That night, I unpacked a few things from my faded canvas bag, an old notebook, cash rolled up in a plastic bag, a few photos of my late husband Frank and me when we were young, and a broken wristwatch. I sat by the window looking out at the empty lot behind the auto shop and wrote in my notebook, new name Helen Whitaker, born 1961, widow, no children, former profession elementary school librarian, graduate of Virginia State College, husband. Frank Whitaker, 1958-2017, buried in Roanoke Memorial Cemetery. No living relatives. Hobbies. Reading, gardening, enjoys quiet. I spent 2 hours just writing out all the details of Helen. Then I started a new section in the notebook, Lies I Have Told. I wanted to be sure that if anyone asked me something a second time, I wouldn't slip up. It's strange. You live nearly your whole life with the truth, and then when you're forced to lie, you have to be more meticulous than ever. My first days in Meadow Ridge passed quietly. I bought groceries at the small town market, cooked on the rattling electric stove, and read books borrowed from the library, the very one from the sign. It was a small library with only 3 main shelves and a reading room with creaky wooden chairs, but the staff was lovely and the patrons all greeted each other. After a week of borrowing books, I volunteered to organize the children's section every Tuesday and Friday. No one asked me any more questions. No one looked at me like I was on the run. Here, people respected silence. Every night, I wrote in my journal, not to pour out my feelings, but to remember. To remember what I said that day, who I met, what I wore, what slips of the tongue I might have made. I lived with a low-grade anxiety, an unexpected knock on the door. A car with unfamiliar plates parked near the trailer would make me break out in a cold sweat. Once a delivery person came to the wrong trailer and I couldn't sleep all night thinking, have they found me? I didn't get Wi-Fi. I kept all electronic devices off except for a flip phone I used only for 911 calls. No one knew I was here. No photos, no social media, no search history. I had become a ghost. Sometimes I dreamed. I dreamed I was back in my house in Brookhaven, and everything was just as it was. Before the stroke, the kitchen smelled of apple pie, the sofa had its familiar crack in the leather, and Frank was watching TV. Lauren would walk into the room and say, "Hi, Mom," as if Hawaii never happened, as if the power of attorney never existed, as if that cold transactional note was never left by my hospital bed. Then I'd wake up to the stained ceiling of the trailer, the familiar smell of dampness, and remember they had moved on. They had chosen to leave me behind when I was at my most vulnerable. I didn't cry much anymore, but I hadn't forgiven them yet. One time while folding laundry, I heard a car pull up outside. My heart sank. I slowed my breathing, standing perfectly still by the window. It was the truck delivering oil to the shop. I laughed at myself for being so paranoid, but that night I checked the deadbolt an extra time before going to sleep. I was still alive, but not as I was before. I was no longer Nora Matthews, the devoted mother. I was Helen Whitaker, a stranger in a small town where no one paid any mind. And though I was sometimes gut-wrenchingly lonely, at least here no one was using my kindness to write me out of my own life. It was a Tuesday afternoon when a sudden rain began to fall. I was standing by the children's bookshelf in the library, arranging the Dr. Seuss books in alphabetical order, when I heard the door creak open and the pitter-patter of small feet on the wooden floor. "Mommy, look, there's a rocking chair." A little girl's voice rang out. I looked up to see a small, blonde-haired girl with eyes as big and round as chestnuts, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Trailing behind her was a young woman probably in her late 20s, her face tired but her eyes still gentle. Her restaurant uniform was splotched with rain, and the zipper on her handbag was broken. She looked up at me and offered an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry. I have to work the night shift today, and her daycare closed early. I was wondering if we could just sit here for a little while." I nodded. "This is a library, not a law office. Everyone is welcome." I paused, wiping dust from my sleeve. "I'm Helen." She smiled and nodded back. "I'm Jenna, and this is Sophie. She's 6, but she can talk for 6 straight hours." I looked at Sophie, who was now sitting primly in the rocking chair, flipping through Where the Wild Things Are, as if she were actually reading it. When I sat down nearby, she turned and whispered, "I know who you are. Your Grandma Helen." I chuckled. "Oh, really? And why do you think that?" "Because you're like the grandmas in the movies, but realer. You know how to fix books, and you know how to read stories, and you're not scary." I didn't know how to respond. Something in the little girl's voice caught in my throat. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me with such simple trust. I just said quietly, "Well, I'll have to try and live up to the title then." From that day on, every Tuesday and Friday, Jenna would stop by the library before her shift and leave Sophie for a little while. The little girl started bringing me her drawings to show off, asking me to read to her and sitting quietly, listening as if I were the only storyteller in the world. Once while reading Charlotte's Web, we reached the part where the spider dies. Sophie sat in silence for a moment, then asked softly, "Grandma Helen, when you love someone and they go away, does the love disappear too?" I took her small hand in mine. "No, sweetie. It just changes into something you keep in your heart forever, like how you'll always remember Charlotte." I never thought I could love someone again this way. Not the heavy, responsible love of a mother for her own child, but a gentle, unforced connection. The feeling of being needed not out of duty, but because someone genuinely likes you. I thought I had lost that forever. Jenna would sometimes invite me over for dinner at their small apartment. The meals were simple pasta with jarred sauce, cold-cut sandwiches, but I hadn't felt that kind of warmth since Frank passed away. Jenna would talk about her hard work days, about how Sophie often asked about her father, who had left when she was just a few months old. I listened, nodded, and didn't ask too many questions. We came to understand each other through our silences. One evening, while Jenna was washing dishes and Sophie was lying on the floor with a book, she turned to me. "Would you mind watching Sophie a few evenings a week, just for 2 or 3 hours? She adores you, and you seem to calm her. At school they say she's anxious, has trouble sleeping." I nodded. Without a second thought, I would be delighted. From then on, I took Sophie to the park, taught her origami with discarded library paper, helped her sound out words in simple books, and told her stories before her naps in the deep, steady voice of someone who was used to being a mother. One time Jenna came home early and found Sophie and me building a fort out of cardboard boxes and old towels. She stood silently for a moment, then said, "I wish my mother were alive to see this." I smiled, but my heart ached. There was something in Jenna's eyes that made me feel like I was healing slowly and quietly. One night I dreamed I was back in the house in Brookhaven, but this time it was empty. No Lauren, no footsteps, no human presence, just an empty room with faded walls and the pale yellow light shining through the window. I walked through the house calling out Lauren, but no one answered. I woke up with tears soaking my pillow. But this time, instead of emptiness, I felt peace. Perhaps because in the dream I realized I had stopped waiting. I had stopped hoping for her to come back, and that as painful as it was also a release. The next morning, Sophie brought me a picture she had drawn with crayons. There were 3 figures in it, a little girl, a young woman, and a white-haired lady holding a book. Underneath she had written, "My family." I kept that drawing in my notebook. Tucked between the notes on my fake identity and the lies I had told, there was that picture, a piece of truth I didn't have to hide. It was Sophie's 7th birthday. The air was cool, but the sun was out, and Jenna had rented the small VFW hall across from the old donut shop in town. Sophie ran around the room in a purple floral dress and a paper crown while I stood by the cake table, clutching a gift I had wrapped myself in old newspaper. Inside was just an old book I'd found in the library's storage, a vintage picture book about cats and trucks. Sophie was obsessed with trucks. I remember sitting down next to her, placing the gift in her lap and saying, "I think you'll like this one." As she tore it open, people clapped and took pictures, and I smiled, a gentle, real, uncalculated smile. It was just a beautiful moment, one I never expected would become evidence. I didn't know that at that moment a man was standing near the door. He knew no one, greeted no one, but his hand held a phone steady. He wasn't filming the party. He was only filming me. A video less than a minute long, but enough to strip away every layer of the life I had so carefully built. 2 days later, I was reshelving books at the library when Jenna burst in, her face pale, her phone trembling in her hand. "Helen, you need to see this, now." I took the phone, and before I could even ask what was wrong, the video was playing. I saw myself smiling, holding the gift, sitting beside Sophie, with the gentle gaze of a real grandmother. But what sent a chill down my spine wasn't the image. It was the caption beneath it, Nora Matthews, the mother whose daughter claimed she abandoned her family to live a life of leisure, now enjoying herself with a new family. The account that posted it had a strange name. No profile picture, no other posts. But someone had shared it to TikTok and Instagram and then to Reddit. And then the thing I feared most happened. Lauren appeared. Not in person. Online. A new video posted from her official account. Lauren sat in our familiar kitchen in Georgia, the lighting soft and yellow. Her voice choked with emotion. My mother disappeared without a word. She left her daughter behind to start a new life. I don't know why. I just know that I'm in pain. The way she looked into the camera, the way she paused every time she said the word mother, it was all carefully orchestrated. Just like those confessionals on daytime television. Soft lighting, a piano score in the background, and a cliffhanger ending as if someone had just ripped her heart out. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I felt empty. The same feeling I had when I first woke up in the ICU with only the beeping of the monitor and no family by my side. Exactly the same. Jenna placed a hand on my shoulder gently. "You don't have to explain anything to me. I imagine you have your reasons." I didn't answer. That night, I locked all the doors, unplugged the Wi-Fi router, and powered down the computer and the iPad. I gathered everything I would need, 2 sets of clothes, the rest of my cash, the old notebook, and a photo of Sophie asleep on my lap in the armchair. I stuffed it all into 2 old duffel bags and slid them under my bed. A few days later, on a gloomy afternoon, I was dusting a bookshelf when I felt a prickling sensation like I was being watched. Looking out the library window, I saw a silver Toyota with Georgia plates parked across the street. The engine was off, no one got out. It just sat there as if waiting. I recognized it immediately. It was Lauren's car. I ducked behind a bookshelf, my heart pounding my fingers, gripping the edge of my cardigan. No one else was in the library. Just me and that car outside. The scene was an exact replica of my nightmares, only this time I was awake. No one knocked on the door. No one came inside. But I knew. This was only the beginning. I knew this moment would come. From the first second I saw that car parked in front of the library, I knew whose it was. In truth, my heart knew before my eyes did. The way it was parked so perfectly, so cleanly, as if trying not to draw attention, yet being utterly conspicuous. Just like how Lauren always arranged everything in her life neat on schedule, image perfect, to show the world she was a successful, responsible daughter. I hid behind the old bookshelf, still holding a library card I hadn't filed away. My heart hammered as if it were knocking on the door for someone else. I considered not going out, just staying inside this library, a stranger. But then I remembered all the years I had lived just to please others, only to be left alone in that cold ICU room. I wasn't hiding anymore. I walked outside. The door opened with a soft jingle of the bell. Lauren was standing there. A white shirt, dress, a beige cardigan, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel. In her hand was a steaming cup of coffee and the familiar tote bag I had bought for her during a Macy's sale. Something was peeking out of it deliberately, a thin file tied with string folded neatly. I recognized it instantly. The power of attorney, the just-in-case document she had told me to sign 2 years ago. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at me as if trying to confirm that the person before her was real. And who could blame her? I was no longer the frail mother, lying amidst a tangle of machines. I was Helen now, in a thick dark brown coat, my hair in a neat bun, my face bare of makeup, and my eyes having seen too much to be surprised anymore. "Hello, Mom," she said softly. I didn't reply. I just held her gaze. "Are you well? It looks peaceful here." A long silence. Then she stepped closer, holding out the coffee cup. "This is for you. Almond milk, no sugar, just how you like it." I looked at the cup. I didn't take it, not because of the coffee, but because I knew this was the opening move in a negotiation, and I was no longer a player in her game. "Mom, I don't know where to begin. We were wrong. Ethan knows it too. We were so cold, so confident that you would always be there." I gave a small, soft laugh, not a mocking one. It was a laugh of understanding, as if I could finally see the emptiness behind her rehearsed apologies. "But it's not too late, Mom," she continued, her voice trembling. "You can still come home to be with us. We won't touch anything, I promise." I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that used to well up with tears when she was a little girl, and fell down now red-rimmed but not genuine. Or maybe I just couldn't trust them anymore. I spoke softly, my voice calmer than I expected. "I've already held the funeral for this relationship. You just didn't attend." Those words made the air grow heavy. Lauren stood frozen, her hands tightening on the straps of her bag. She didn't cry. She didn't blame Rick. She didn't mention Hawaii or the almost sold house. She just bowed her head, and then she turned and walked away. As she stepped off the library porch, the coffee cup remained on the stone bench beside me, the steam long gone. A week later, the library received an unmarked envelope, no return address. It was addressed only to Fenora Matthews, or whatever name you feel is right. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my own. I had scribbled it on an intake form in the ICU when I thought I wasn't going to make it. I remembered stuffing it into my bag of personal effects, telling Marcus, the nurse, to give it to whoever came for me. I never thought it still existed. I opened the letter. My hands trembled, but my eyes were dry. The slanted words were still smudged with blurred ink. "If I don't wake up, I hope my daughter can forgive me. But if I live..." Please come. I'm so scared." I looked at every word, every line, as if reading the last testament of a stranger. And then I wept. Not out of regret, not out of nostalgia, but because I remembered why I was still alive. I didn't live to be forgiven. I lived to reclaim my own existence, to no longer be the mother who could be tucked away in a nursing home like a spare piece of furniture. I lived to stand here in this small, cold town and know that whether my name was Nora or Helen, I was still me, a human being, not someone's transition plan. I folded the letter and placed it inside my notebook next to the list of old passwords and a new small note I had recently written. No contact, peace. I put the notebook in the tin box under my bed. Next to Sophie's drawing and the only picture I still had of Lauren at 8 years old, hugging a teddy bear I had sewn by hand. I didn't burn the photo, but I didn't hang it up either. I just left it there. A part of a past I didn't deny but no longer carried with me every day. I never thought a quiet afternoon with a few mundane forms could bring the whole past crashing down on me like a rotted roof. The sun was out, but a cold wind still found its way through every crack. I was sitting at the trailer's kitchen table, the small table Jenna used for everything from eating breakfast and fixing zippers to teaching Sophie how to write the word grandma. She had asked me to help her fill out the application for Sophie to enter first grade at the public elementary school. We had a stack of papers, a copy of the birth certificate, proof of residency, and the school's required forms. I didn't know why she was handwriting so many sections when she could have done it online, but she just said, "I wanted you to do it with me." I thought it was a sweet gesture. I didn't know then that fate was knocking softly in Jenna's slanted handwriting. I was on the 3rd page when I stopped. Names of Jenna's adoptive parents, Diane and Howard Whitaker, San Diego, CA. I froze. I read it again. Once, then twice. My heart pounded harder each time. I could hear the blood rushing to my ears, a dull roar, as if someone had covered them. Whitaker, a name that was far from unfamiliar. I had heard it so many times during the first years of the baby girl I never got to hold. That year I was 25. My husband Nate was only 28. He had just been diagnosed with late-stage testicular cancer, and we had no significant health insurance. The doctor said he needed immediate chemotherapy, and even then his chances were not high. When I found out I was pregnant, I nearly collapsed. We had planned to wait a few years to have children to get on our feet financially, but life never waits. We fought a lot, not out of blame, but out of helplessness. I vividly remember the night I sat crying on the bathroom floor while Nate slumped against the door outside, repeating over and over, "I'm so sorry." One night, through a friend of a friend, I was introduced to a wealthy couple, Diane and Howard Whitaker. They lived in California, couldn't have children, and they made an offer. They would cover all of Nate's medical bills, plus a long-term health care stipend. In return, I would carry the baby to term and sign over my parental rights to them. They said they would love her as their own. They promised she would have a good education, a good life that she would want for nothing. I signed. I didn't look back. I had no other choice. Not a single photo, not a single copy of the papers. All I received was a sum of money and a promise that I would never make contact and they would never cross that line. For years after, I tried to live as if it never happened. I had Lauren after Nate went into remission. We bought the house in Brookhaven, planted flowers, got a dog, celebrated Thanksgiving. But I never stopped wondering, especially on nights when Lauren was 3 or 4 running a high fever or having a nightmare. I would think, what if my other child is out there somewhere crying just like this? Then Nate passed away. I wanted to find her. But all the records were sealed. Every path was a dead end. Until today. I sat there, the forms still in my hand, my fingers ice cold. Jenna noticed nothing. She was cutting out labels for Sophie's notebooks, humming a nursery rhyme. I don't know how I kept my face so calm. I folded the paperwork, trying not to tremble. "Jenna, your adoptive parents..." Where do they live now?" She looked up and smiled. "Oh, I'm not in touch anymore. My mom passed when I was 16. My dad, I guess he's still around, but we weren't close. I moved to Vermont when I was 21. Been on my own ever since." "Did you ever look for your birth mother?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She paused for a few seconds. "No. I figure if she gave me up, she must have had her reasons. I'm not angry. I'm grateful I had a good upbringing. But the person I consider my mother now is you." A lump formed in my throat. I turned away, pretending to pick up a pen that had fallen to the floor. I didn't want her to see my face. I didn't want Sophie to see her, Grandma Helen, suddenly so fragile and broken like a stranger. That night I sat alone and pulled the old iron box from under my bed. Inside, I kept a few small things: a broken silver chain, Lauren's school photo, a few old diary pages, and a slip of paper with a handwritten note: adoption contact, Whitaker, Diane, and Howard, 1992. I had no pictures of the baby I gave away, but now I had her face in front of me every single day. It was Jenna, my daughter, the one who loved me without needing a reason, without knowing our biological connection, without needing a single explanation. I didn't tell her. I didn't know how to begin, or if I even had the right. I just folded the application, placed it in the tin box, and wrote a new small line on the inside of the lid home. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because it was drizzling and Jenna was baking an apple pie for the first time. The bottom was a little burnt, but Sophie was dancing around, asking for more. The small kitchen was warm with the smell of baked butter, and I was wiping the table when Sophie called out, "Grandma, there's a letter for you." There was no return address, just the words, "For Mom." That handwriting, no matter how she tried to disguise it, I would always recognize. I didn't read it right away. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea, took it out to the back porch of the trailer, where a sturdy paint-chipped wooden chair sat. I sat down and opened the letter. "Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this. I hurt you more than I ever thought I was capable of. But if you have any small space left for me in your heart, please let me see you just once. No Rick, no cameras, no legal documents. Just you and me like before. I'll wait for your answer. Lauren." I sat still for a long time, not to deliberate, but to remind myself that I was living in the present. I had left. I had survived. But if I didn't close this chapter myself, the wound would fester forever. I made the call. Lauren's voice was choked as if she were expecting the line to go dead at any moment. I said only, "We can meet at the Brookhaven Cemetery, Sunday, 10 in the morning. "Yes." "I thank you, Mom." I didn't reply. I just hung up. On Sunday, the sky was unusually clear. I wore the old olive green wool coat that Nate used to love. In my hand, I held a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter, just a few lines I had written in the hospital when I wasn't sure I'd have another chance to say goodbye. When I arrived, Lauren was already there. No makeup, no heels, no designer handbag. She wore a turtleneck sweater and jeans, looking smaller than I remembered. We stood before Nate's grave. The headstone was the same Nathaniel Matthews, a loving husband, father, and friend. I had once wanted to add the line, "He never left," but then I thought, who needed to know but me? I placed the flowers at the base of the stone. The wind blew softly. I looked at the letters carved into the granite, then said quietly, as if speaking to both of them at once, "Your father also thought he had more time, but he didn't abandon me when I was dying." Lauren stood silently. After a moment, she sank to the ground, though the grass was still damp with dew. She said nothing. Her eyes welled with tears, but she was no longer feigning strength. Her shoulders began to shake, and then she broke into sobs. I didn't step forward. I stood there in silence. This was not a scene of a mother embracing her repentant daughter. It wasn't a tearful reunion followed by forgiveness. This was the truth, raw and painful. the consequence of irreversible actions. A silence heavier than any explanation. After a while, Lauren stood up, her eyes red. She said, her voice cracking, "Mom, there's no reason for you to forgive me. It's just, we thought we had more time." I didn't answer right away. I looked at this woman, the person who had once fit in my arms, who had called me her hero, and who had also left me alone in a cold ICU room with a note like a moving announcement. Finally, I just let out a slow breath and said, "You already buried that version of me. This time, I chose to hold the funeral for her myself." She looked at me, not understanding at first. Then slowly she realized this wasn't a metaphor. This was a decision. Lauren stepped forward, her arms open as if to embrace me. I took one step back. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. I looked at her, not with anger nor with forgiveness, just a final emptiness after all the breaking. Then I turned and walked away. On the way back, I stopped at a roadside stand and bought 2 vanilla ice cream cones, Sophie's favorite. When I got to the trailer, Jenna was busy in the back garden and Sophie ran to hug my legs. "Where did you go, Grandma?" I knelt down to her level and handed her the ice cream. "I went to bury something old. Now I'm back." She grinned, ice cream already on her chin, and chattered on about a rabbit in the backyard. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I wrote a short letter. Not to be sent, just to put an end to what needed to be closed. I wrote it to myself. You survived, you left, and you chose yourself again. I folded it and placed it in the tin box, along with Jenna's birth certificate, the letter from the ICU, and the note that said, "Home." Everything I once was, everything I had lost, and everything I was now slowly finding again. It was all in that small box. No one's approval needed. No one's forgiveness required. I just needed to know that I was still here living as a whole person. The early mornings in Meadow Ridge are always chilly even in early June. I usually wake before Jenna and Sophie, brewing myself a cup of coffee in the old aluminum pot I bought at the second-hand shop near the gas station. It's not the rich, dark coffee from the Starbucks places Lauren used to take me to, but its faint, slightly burnt taste makes me feel like I'm exactly where I need to be. This morning was no different. I sat at the small table, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, my eyes looking out the trailer window. In the yard, the wild daisies Jenna planted last year were beginning to bloom again. Sophie was curled up asleep in the next room, and Jenna had left for her early shift at the bakery on the other side of town. I pulled the tin box from the drawer, the one I've kept since I moved here. Inside are a few things of no value to anyone else, but to me they are a lifetime. An old birth certificate with faded ink, a letter I wrote in the ICU that no one ever read, a folded note Lauren sent recently, and beneath it a photo of 2 little girls beaming Lauren and Jenna, taken in 2 different, distant moments, now placed side by side as if they were never separated. I took out a fresh sheet of paper. I began to write. To myself, you survived, you left, and you chose yourself again. I paused, took a deep breath, and continued. You left behind a house, a place that held warm Christmases, and also the place where you were last abandoned by a window. You left behind a name, the name written on every bill, every birthday card, every fragment of your past. You left behind a family, people who thought that sharing blood gave them the right to hurt you whenever they pleased, and then expect forgiveness as if it were a given. I set the pen down for a moment. My hand was trembling not from the cold, but from a gentle, profound emotion rising within me. Not anger, not sadness, just peace. What did you get back? You got back the sound of pure laughter every afternoon when a little girl yells, "Nana, look at me." You got back a sudden hug from the daughter you were forced to give away, who now holds you with a love that needs no name. You got back a quietness in your heart, something that even when you had everything, you never truly possessed. I slowed my writing. Not everyone gets to start over at 63. But you did not by a miracle, but by a decision. You chose to leave. You chose to live. You chose to love again, even though no one calls you Mom. I folded the paper and placed it gently in the box next to the crayon scribbles Sophie had given me, a drawing of 3 people holding hands with a sun, a tree, and the wobbly words, me, Mommy, and Nana. The trailer door burst open. Sophie ran in her rubber boots caked in mud, her face flushed. Nana! Nana, look what I found. She held up a white seashell, slightly cracked at the edge. I dug it up in the backyard by the rocks. I was surprised. There are seashells in Vermont. Sophie nodded firmly, her face full of pride. Maybe it's from the ocean a long, long time ago, or a bird brought it. I laughed. Is that so? Well, what should we build with it now? She thought for a moment, then shouted, a tiny castle for a fairy. I laughed out loud, a real laugh, not forced, not jagged like when I first arrived. A laugh I thought I had lost forever. I picked her up, settled her on my lap, and looked out at the sky, which was turning a deeper blue after a night of rain. Maybe I hadn't gotten my past back, but I had rewritten my present in my own words with no one's approval, and that for me was enough. If you're still listening to this, thank you truly. I don't know how far I've come, but I know one thing for sure, I'm not where I started. Maybe you're sitting alone in a small kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold on the table. Maybe you're also living with the feeling of being left behind, of no longer being needed. Or worse, maybe you've forgotten the last time someone truly looked you in the eye and asked, "Are you okay, Mom? I was there. I used to think that being a mother, a wife, meant yielding, giving, and enduring, because that's what love was. It wasn't until I was lying silently in that ICU, my heart stopped for 11 seconds, that I realized loving others doesn't mean abandoning yourself. You know, sometimes we wake up after the storm not to go back to how things were, but to become a version of ourselves we never dared to dream of, stronger, wiser, and more at peace. I'm not angry with Lauren anymore, but I also didn't choose forgiveness just to hold on to the title of mother. Forgiveness, if it happens, must come from both sides, and life isn't always that fair, and I've learned to be at peace without it. If you are a woman entering the second half of your life, I want to tell you this. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. You do not have to be pitiful to be loved. You have the right to choose again, even if you are 60, 70, or 80. You have the right to a new life, even when you think it's too late. And you have the right to be happy without asking anyone for permission. I lost so much to understand that. But if my story helps you realize it a little sooner, then none of the pain I went through was in vain. So what about you? If there is one life lesson you wish you had known sooner, what would it be? Please share it with me and everyone else in the comments below. You never know, you might just help someone get through today a little more easily. Thank you for listening to me not as a character in a story, but as an ordinary woman who was broken, who was lost, and who in the end found herself again. We're going to be okay, as long as we don't forget we deserve to be Helen.